So Erin's going to try to advance slides when you do, but she
Okay.
won't be able to see it.
Hello?
Give her a vocal.
Hey.
Okay, sure.
Erin, can you hear me right now? We haven't used the microphone on this, so I
Yeah, I
think
can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
if anybody wants to ask questions verbally instead of in the chat, we have the speaker on the camera itself, so we can hear you in the room. Probably good to get started. It is 7:01. Welcome, Laurie. I guess I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, no, thank you for having me tonight, and thanks for coming out or staying at home and watching as well. I'm Laurie Reid. I'm the city arborist with the city of Charlotte, and part of what we do at landscape management is we manage the trees that are located between the street and the sidewalk throughout the corporate city limits of Charlotte. So trees that need an inspection or need pruning, or if they die, need removal. That's part of the things we do. We also plant trees back in the right of way. A big thing that we're trying to do within the city of Charlotte, and we need help from all our residents, is to increase our tree canopy. We want to keep it, but we really need to increase it. So some of the things that I want to talk about are things you can look for at the trees in your yard to know if maybe you need to get an arborist to come and look at the tree for you, or just things to be on the lookout for that might signal that you might need some work on your tree. I love taking questions during. We can take questions during. I'll definitely make sure I set aside some time to take the questions after as well. But I am an entomologist by education, so I love talking about bugs. I like learning about mushrooms, that different fungus affects trees. It can have a detrimental effect. Some mushrooms are actually beneficial to trees, so I love learning about that. So I'll cover a little bit of some mushrooms that you might find near trees to be on the lookout for. But I'll go ahead and get started. So I'll go ahead and switch slides. Hopefully everyone that's here is interested in some sort of conservation. So some of these things about the benefits of trees you might already know. One of the things that everyone thinks about with trees is they give us oxygen, they help to clean the air, but trees are amazing because the way that their canopy spread out and all the leaves that they have, they'll intercept rain as it's coming down. So that'll actually reduce the amount of rain that falls to the ground. It reduces erosion. Trees can take up a lot of water from the ground as well. All that really good shade that they provide us gives us cooler areas as well for our parking lots, for our houses. When you have a tree planted around your house, the shade that it gives you in the summertime can actually reduce your cooling bills in the summer. So that's really great for houses, for businesses. When you're walking down a street, it's just nicer. You want to get in the shade in the middle of the summertime. So trees do so many great things. Like I said, I'm an entomologist. I love insects. So these trees give homes for our birds, for our squirrels, and food for our different animals as well. And for me, I think trees are really what makes Charlotte, Charlotte. That's one thing we always hear when people come to visit. You've got a lot of trees. There's a lot of trees here. So it's a really great thing. Some kind of hidden benefits that you might not think about with trees that they provide. Some research that's been done, they have found that houses that have a well-manicured yard, have landscaping, have trees, will actually sell for a higher price and have a quicker sale. Same thing with businesses. People want to shop in areas where there's trees. So businesses that have trees and landscaping tend to get more business as well. Some really cool social science studies that have been done about trees. Areas that have trees, it's reported to have lower crime rates. People will have less anxiety when they're exposed to greenery, exposed to trees and landscaping. And there's been some studies in hospital settings too that people recover faster, even if they just have a view to the outside of trees. So like I said, the normal things we think of with trees, the clean air, the water, but it also has these kind of little hidden things that trees do for us as well. So if you have a tree in your yard, you know, some of the things I'd like to encourage people to do to get out to look at their trees and during different parts of the year. A lot of times people are outside in the summer, you see the leaves on the tree, you see the wildlife. Look at your trees in the wintertime too. This is a great time coming into spring before they start leafing out. Look for any, some of the signs that I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to switch slides. So some things, an easy thing that we can do for our trees is to mulch around the base of the trees. Mulch is fantastic. We definitely suggest using a natural mulch material. You can use like double hammered mulch. You can go to Compost Central and you can get a truckload of mulch and take that back to your house. A lot of arborist companies also, when they do tree work, they'll grind parts of the trees, the limbs, and anything small enough to go through that chipper. They'll deliver mulch to your house for free, and you can spread that on top of your plants. And what this mulch does is it helps to insulate the ground, so it helps to regulate the soil temperature. It'll slowly decompose and put nutrients back in the soil. So all really good things. It also helps to hold in water as well. So when you do mulch, this picture here is a no-no. You don't want to do this with your mulch right here. You want to make sure that your mulch is no more than 4 inches deep. In this particular picture here, this is probably about 18 inches deep. So that's way too deep. You want to have your mulch 2 to 4 inches, and you want to make sure that it's not in contact with the trunk of the tree. Because like I said, it'll hold moisture inside there, and sometimes too much moisture against the bark of the tree can cause that bark to start decomposing, invite insects and other things in here. I'm going to change slides. Some of the other bad things that we see with mulching around town is something we call volcano mulching, where you've got this big old mound of mulch right up against the trunk of the tree, or an eagle's nest, right? So you have this big old bowl and a big ring of mulch. Those are no-nos. Those are ways we don't want to mulch the trees. This volcano mulching, what can happen is as you pile it up and get it really, really deep, the roots on the tree, they need oxygen, okay? So roots need oxygen, they need water, they need nutrients. When you start piling a lot of mulch on top of the tree roots, it reduces the amount of oxygen. So the tree starts growing roots from the trunk. It'll grow in that mulchy area, and that's not in contact with the ground, so it's not really structurally stable. So don't want a volcano mulch. What you want to do is you want to spread 2 to 4 inches layer of mulch around the tree and spread it out as wide as you can. We love to recommend to get out to the drip line. So imagine your tree is an umbrella and the rain drips off the end of that. If you can spread it out to where that rain drips off the tree, that's great. If your tree is really large and that's going to take up a lot of your yard, you don't want to have mulch in your yard, that's fine. Try to get as big of a circle as you can with that mulch. So just spread it out, kind of even, not touching the trunk. You know, over mulching, it just wastes mulch. It's going to cause those roots to grow into that mulchy area instead of the ground, and it can definitely cause problems with trees. So what we want to look for the trees, put your mulch ring and then pull the mulch away from the trunk of the tree just a couple inches. So you can see right here, these nice roots that are right at the ground level. We do want to see those. We want to see that root flare. So where the trunk is flaring out and the roots are growing, that wants to be right there at ground level. Did you have a question? Okay, I just want to make sure. All right. So after you have your tree properly mulched, another thing you want to do, not now, we've been having quite a bit of rain in the last week, so maybe not this week, you don't need to water your tree, but especially during the summertime, when we're in a drought period, you want to think about taking care and watering that tree. If you have a newly planted tree, you want to water that tree during that first year after planting every single week. You don't have to have a fancy soil monitor to test out the moisture in the soil. Your finger is really the best moisture meter that you have. So stick your finger in the ground, kind of near those roots of the tree, about 1 inch down. If it feels dry, go ahead and put some water on that tree. If it feels wet, don't water the tree. Very simple. You don't have to be have a lot of fancy gadgets. You've got a couple on your hands right there. At second year after tree planting, you want to water every 2 weeks. And the longer that tree's been in the ground, you can kind of move that out. When we have hot, dry weather, during drought periods, definitely think about watering your trees. The frequency of the watering is really more important than how much you put on. And there's a couple different ways that you can water trees. One of my favorites is this bucket method. So this is just a 5-gallon bucket you can get at Lowe's, or different restaurants sometimes will have those buckets. And just drill a couple 1/8-inch holes in the bottom, fill that water up, put it around where the root zone of the tree is, and it will just slowly seep out. So that slow watering is really the best thing for trees. You want to have a nice slow water to get in all that area to get all those roots. There's other ways too. Bag slowly will drip. One thing to be aware of, if you use these tree bags, paper wasps love to build nests inside of there. So just be really careful if you do use that might be a place that they want to make their nest. So just be aware of that. But you want to do a nice slow irrigation on that tree, just to give that tree a nice amount of water. And if you have a really large tree, if you're doing this bucket method, this is what I do at my house. I love it. You'll fill it up with water, let it slowly drain, move it to the other side of the tree, fill it back up, and let it slowly drain. So you just want to try to get good moisture around that tree. This is the time of year when we see a lot of trees that are being topped. And I'm sorry, I changed the slide, I apologize. And this is something that's really detrimental to trees. So what topping is when you just randomly cut off a branch, just at it like a level. A lot of times you see this with crepe myrtle trees, they'll be completely flat on the top, or they'll be kind of rounded over in a weird way. This particular picture right here is a willow oak tree. I was driving back with my children in the car, and I saw it. I went, my kids are like, "What's wrong, Mommy? What is it?" I was like, "Did someone hurt that tree?" It just really hurt me inside to see that someone would top this tree. So what they did is they just randomly took a branch and just cut right in the middle. And so what happens when you do this topping is the tree wants to have leaves, right? The leaves are what is making the food for that tree. So once you cut all those leaves off, that tree is going to vigorously sprout. And so where that area was cut, the sprouts are just going to randomly come out. And so it actually makes the tree look really super bushy, but all of those new sprouts are not strongly attached to the tree limb. And so they're likely to break during storm events, during ice, during snow events as well. So it actually creates more of a hazard to the tree. I'll talk about proper pruning in just a minute. So it encourages sprouting. It will give you poor structure on the tree. And one of the things that we hear a lot of people say, well, I'm supposed to top my crepe myrtle. That's what you do with those kind of trees. And that's not accurate. Don't need to top them. It does not encourage more flowers. It actually stresses that tree because that tree now has to take all these reserves energy to make brand new branches. So it takes a lot more effort than that. So very big. We don't want to top our trees. If you work with someone and they say, oh, I can top that tree for you, just say, no, thank you. I do not want that. If this is something that you've done to your tree in the past, you can call a certified arborist and they can do some remedial pruning for sometimes on some trees to get good structure and make sure we have really strong branch attachments. It'll take a while depending on how large the tree is and how much work needs to be done to it, but please don't top your trees. So these are just some of the pictures right here of what the excess sprout looks like. So this is on a crepe myrtle tree. You can see it was top right here. All these extra sprouts are just coming out on that tree. So if you do have a tree and you think you might need to do some pruning, as a homeowner, having a tree that you can prune when it's smaller is a lot better than trying to prune a really large tree. Young trees have a lot of, they're vigorously growing, they have a lot of energy, they can recover a lot quicker than a really large mature tree that you may have in your yard. If you do have a new tree or just a smaller tree in your yard, anything that you can prune from the ground is definitely something that you should be looking for, or maybe a pruning, like a pole saw. If you feel like you need to get on a ladder to prune trees, please don't get on that ladder. Have a professional come out to do that work for you. As far as pruning goes, the best time of year is during the dormant season before the trees flush out and put on their leaves for the spring. This is because the trees will have time when they start actively growing to close over that wound. So trees are, different from people. Our skin heals over, right? Trees don't heal. What they do is they grow a new growth of wood to cover that wound right there. And when the tree is coming into the spring and everything starts moving, the sap starts flowing up from the ground and the tree starts getting more active, it'll be able to close that wound a lot easier. During the summertime, if you do pruning, it's a little bit stressful. It's really hot. The trees are requiring a lot of water. So it's a little bit extra stress on those trees. So during the dormant season is a really good time to think about pruning the trees. Anytime during the year, if you have dead or dying, diseased, or broken tree limbs on your tree, you can prune those off at any time during the year. That's perfectly fine. The picture that's on the screen right here, I see this dead limb with the dead leaves right there. So that can easily be pruned back really at any time during the year. So some of the reasons that pruning, you may need to prune a tree, you may need to get clearance. So if you have a tree that's close to your driveway, on your private property, you may need to raise it up because when you get out of your car, it's poking you in the face all the time. So getting that clearance so those limbs aren't in your way. Sometimes just as trees grow, just the spacing of the branches, you might need to get that spacing a little bit different. And when a tree is under stress, so this is a crepe myrtle, sometimes when trees are under stress, if it's drought stress or they've been hit by the lawnmower too many times or any kind of digging near the roots may have caused the roots to get severed, sometimes what they'll do is they'll sucker sprout. So the suckers that are growing from the ground, you want to definitely prune those off of that tree. It's not going to hurt it to go ahead and prune that off. And if you like the look of a bushy tree, that's fine too. So when you're thinking about pruning and looking at a tree, one of the things that we look for is the way that the branches are growing. So this picture is actually the sample that I physically have in my hand right here. And what we call this right here is these two branches are co-dominant. So they're almost the same diameter and size, and they're both growing at the same way. And so they're both competing for light. So trees need sunlight to be able to for their leaves to capture the sunlight, to be able to make food, to be able to grow. So when we have these two limbs that are competing against each other to get as much sunlight as possible, it can be a bad thing. So this particular branch right here, the shape between the two branches is the letter V. So what can happen there is between these two branches, as they grow in diameter, the bark will never grow together. It's always going to be pushing against each other. So over time, as each one of these stems grow in diameter, they actually push against each other. And if we get if you have a branch that's really long, if we get a lot of ice or a lot of rain during the summertime, what can sometimes happen is this branch will peel off, and then you'll be left with a hole in the side of the tree. So what we want to look for good structure is the letter U. So this V structure right here is what we don't want to see on our trees, but this right here, this nice curve of a letter U is what we want to look for. You're not going to get bark stuck between these two right here. It's just a stronger structure on that tree. So what can happen when we have these co-dominant branches? So this is a willow oak. I have these two limbs right here. It's going to have bark that over time is going to build up here. And this is what happened to this really large willow oak tree right here, is we had a big branch that was coming up straight here. They're all coming out of the same area. And just over time, that branch failed. And you can see this darker area. The bark is on this particular limb right there. Some roots and stuff stuff growing in there. So it's just a really weak attachment for those trees. So that tree, how large it is, it would be really hard to prune to make this tree safe. A tree over here on this side, it's pretty small and young. So this would be something very easily that this right here could be cut off. This branch, this whole entire branch right there cut off. So now this is the center part of your tree and you're not having a competition. So when the tree's young, it's a really good time to consider pruning. The tree will seal over that area a lot easier. When we recommend pruning for trees, we recommend a 3-cut method. And so you've got a cut 1, which is on the underside of it. Cut 2 is just a little bit outside. So cut 1 goes about halfway through. Cut 2 comes all the way through. You're removing that long limb, removing the weight so you don't put stress over here on the tree. And then once you have all that weight off, then you come back and then you make your 3rd cut closer to the tree. So I probably should switch the slide. Sorry about that. So this is just in writing what I was just talking about. If you do pruning on your tree, you want to look what we call the collar of the branch. On some trees, you'll see it's kind of swollen where it attaches, where the branch is coming into. So some trees will kind of show you the right area to prune. If you cut too close to the trunk of the tree and make something called a flush cut, the tree is not going to be able to close that over. So where this branch is attaching near this branch collar, there's a lot of specialized cells that are going to grow and help make that curved wood that's going to close that hole off right there. So that's the area that you want to cut to. So I'm just going to flip through these kind of quickly. So this is the cut 1. This is the undercut, about halfway through. Cut 2 is just a little bit further out from that first cut. That's going to remove the length of the limb. And you can see what happened here. When they did cut 2, it peeled the bark back to cut number 1. And that's fine because we're removing this whole entire branch. But if we didn't do cut 1 and that cut peeled it all the way back to here, that could have been really hard for that tree to deal with. And your 3rd cut is going to be near that branch collar. And then that's your final cut right there. So this is what happens when you don't have a good pruning cut. This is this is a ball cypress, and they just took the entire branch off. They didn't reduce the weight on it, and it peeled all the way down the trunk. So that tree's gonna have to expend a lot of energy to close that area off. And this is what a flush cut looks like. So they took the branch off and they cut all the way into the bark of the tree. And again, this is going to be really hard because you've removed that tissue that's going to close off that area. So this is a tree that I had to have removed from my yard. And while we were splitting it, I was like, ooh, that's a really good sample. So this is a tree before I bought the house that the cut was made. And this right here, this little roll of wood is the area that would try to close over that pruning cut, but it didn't quite do it. The branch may have been a little bit too deep. It wasn't able to do it. So what happened, you can see this discoloration of the wood. So decay has set in and it's starting to travel down into the main trunk of the tree. So we want to make sure when we're pruning our trees, we want to make sure we have the right cut to give our trees the best start to be able to close over and not allow decay to set into that tree. So because when we prune, we are going to be using tools. We want to be careful. We want to make sure that we wear proper protection, wear eye protection, wear gloves. If you have a hard hat and you're working, pruning above your head, it might not be a bad idea to put that on as well. So you always want to have your protection gear on. If you're cutting branches that are less than 1/2 inch in diameter, you could use hand pruners to cut that off pretty easily. If you're going anywhere between 1/2 inch to 1 inch, you'd want to use a handsaw or loppers or maybe a pole saw if it's a little bit higher. But like I said in the beginning, if you have something that's above your head and you feel like you need to get on a ladder to do that pruning work, leave that to the professionals. An International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist is who you'd want to call to come out and do the work on your tree. They'll know the proper type of pruning cuts and what needs to be done for your tree. So something else is another thing to look for on your tree, especially now during the winter time. When a lot of our hardwoods have lost their leaves, you might notice that you have vines that are growing on your tree. Vines like English ivy and wisteria are pretty common that grow along our trees in Mecklenburg County. And what these vines can do is they're going to take up nutrients and water from the ground, so they're going to be competing with your tree for that. And as they grow up the main trunk of the tree, their leaves can cover the leaves of the tree. And so that can block the sunlight, that can reduce the photosynthesis and reduce the amount of food that the tree can make. This time of year, you know, we're hearing a lot. We had a big event, a storm event that happened earlier this week, and we might get a little bit more coming up tomorrow and maybe this weekend. During the winter, when our oaks and other deciduous trees have lost their leaves, if they have vines on it, that English ivy holds its leaves all year round. So that's going to make a nice surface for ice and snow to sit on, and that'll add extra weight to the branches. So sometimes having vines too much on the tree can make trees susceptible, the branches, to break when they have that excess weight on there. So Chinese wisteria, a pretty common vine that we see around here. Pretty purple flowers. They smell, I think they kind of smell grapey, like a grape bubblegum kind of smell. They look pretty, but they're really bad for trees. This picture right here, you can see vines. These vines can get really thick, several inches wide. And just like because they're plants, the vine is growing in diameter, the tree trunk is growing in diameter. So as it's wrapped around the trunk of the tree, it can actually dig in to the part of the tree that moves water and nutrients up and down the tree. So it can girdle, it can kind of strangle that tree. So that's definitely something we want to avoid for our trees. And again, it is very vigorous. It'll grow up from the tree. It'll cover all those leaves right there. So definitely something that we want to control on these trees. And I'll tell you how to control it in just a second. Another really common vine that we see on trees is English ivy. While you might find it pretty growing in the understory, it will climb up the trunk of your tree and get up to the top and really block out. So it can be extremely aggressive and cover a lot of that tree. There are methods that you can do to help control the vines on the tree. So you can get either loppers, or if it's small enough, hand pruners. Here I'm using a handsaw. And what you want to do is you want to cut the vines wherever's comfortable for you. You know, I usually cut right here because that's a comfortable level. I don't love cutting above my head. So usually cut, 4 feet off the ground, cut those vines, being careful to, if you pull it away from the bark, that you're not ripping the bark of the tree. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut near the ground level. So what you're going to be left with is this blank area between the vines. If you just cut it here and just let it go, sometimes they'll reroot and still be able to grow. So you want to make a nice thing those vines. Take all that material, especially with English ivy, because it'll sprout like mad. Collect all that material and put that in. Okay, thank you. Put that into a bag, all the leaves, all the little notes, and just completely get rid of that material so it doesn't just sprout back on the ground. Those vines will slowly die in the canopy of the tree. Really important. You don't want to pull the vines out of the tree because depending on how they are, they might be wrapped around a branch up high and you might actually break that branch. So after you cut all this, just let it naturally die in the tree. It'll start falling apart. It'll kind of shrink in size as it dries out and it'll fall out of that crown of the tree. It might not look the prettiest while it's going through that dying phase right there, but just give it some time and just make sure. Yes.
I missed a couple questions for those.
Oh, yeah.
So I have one question is there a great website that you'd recommend to use to find somebody if they need someone to cut a tree?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So treesaregood.org is the International Society of Arboriculture. It's treesAreGood.org, or you can type the letter I for international, S is for Society of A, Arboriculture, ISA, Certified Arborist, or Find an Arborist. So on that Trees Are Good webpage, there's a link that's Find an Arborist, and you can search by zip code. You can search 25-mile radius, 50-mile radius, smaller radius. If you have been talking to a company and you want to verify that they're certified arborists, you can do that as well. Not all people that cut trees are certified arborists. So the certification is voluntary, and it's every 3 years, if you have your certified arborist, you have to get continuing education credits. So people that have dedicated their time to getting their certified arborist certificate are interested in learning, and they want to do the right thing and do the right thing by the industry, follow our industry standards. So that's why we always recommend those certified arborists. But yeah, so you can go to that, find an arborist, and do that search that way.
The other question was about the suckers on the trees.
Yeah.
They wanted to know if it's possible to replant them to start new trees if they have any roots or if they're just growing from the tree.
So I love trying things, you know. I know, you know, there's Prune, which is a hormone that when you take a cut, you can put the root tone on it and you can plant it in like a sandy kind of material that lets water go through there. I'm a fan. Sometimes I just cut things and stick it in water and see what roots. If you're just cutting a sucker off, you're not expending a whole lot of energy. So, you know, you could try it, or even just get like a light potting soil mix and just kind of put it in there. Just see if roots grow. No guarantee, of course, but it was free. So yeah, not too bad to try.
That's it for now.
Okay, good. All right, that's fine. So for the spine removal, you know, go ahead, make that clear space, get rid of any areas, and just kind of keep an eye on that tree for anything that moves back. It might take a while. If you have a lot of vines on that tree, it might take a while for them to die back, but it's definitely something you want to do for that tree. Where you have trees and you may have weeds that are coming up, we talked about mulching. Mulch is an amazing weed control. I'll be honest with you. If you're keeping your mulch at 2 to 4 inches, you probably shouldn't get a whole lot of weeds in that area. That's another great thing about that mulch. The other really good thing about mulch is it keeps string trimmers away from the trunks of the tree. Now this picture was set up, so this person isn't really working. This is just kind of a setup picture one of my coworkers took. But if you do need to do any kind of weed control near a tree, definitely recommend pulling those. You don't want to use string trimmers. Those things move super fast, and a lot of trees, when they're younger, they're going to have super thin bark. And so once you get through that bark, you're getting into that living tissue that's moving water and moving nutrients. You don't want to disrupt that with the string trimmer. Really important too is not to put down plastic or any kind of landscape cloth underneath that mulch material. Some of the plastic material doesn't allow water to flow through, doesn't allow a lot of oxygen to get down to those tree roots. And if you put that on top of the soil and then you put mulch on top of that, as that mulch breaks down, it turns to soil and then weeds will grow in there. So definitely recommend not putting down landscape cloth. I know sometimes people want to put down cardboard to help suppress weeds. Don't do that either. A lot of the cardboard boxes that we have now are coated with plastics to keep out the rain so they don't disintegrate really well. So that's not really good too. It's going to repel water instead of let it go through. You know, just do some hand pulling of those weeds. When you're within that drip line, so remember that umbrella of the tree. When you're inside that drip line, be really careful if you use any herbicides under that tree. My double exclamation points right there. So really important. You want to make sure you read the label. If it says that it controls woody brush, it might damage your tree, right? So just be really careful of that. Weed and feed products too. Some of the ingredients in there, 2,4-D or MCPP, they have been found to damage trees as well. So sometimes some trees will take up the roots, especially if you use a lot. You know, if you think a little bit of weed and feed is good, but more is better, that's not true. You know, You want to follow the label. There's been research done. They know exactly how much needs to be out there. A too high of rate can damage trees and cause distortion, yellowing, and sometimes mortality of trees as well. So you want to look at there. So when you look at the label, this has 2,4-D and Prop P, that's MCPP. So that you don't want to use that around trees. Anytime underneath the drip line, you don't want to use that. Another product that's pretty common for weed control is Dicamba. Some trees can absorb this material as well. So again, you don't want to use these products underneath trees. So really important that if you use any kind of pests or herbicides around a tree, something like a Roundup that just has glyphosate inside of it, that's a contact that has to get onto the leaves. Some Roundups have other material mixed in with that, so be really careful. Like, read the label, do a little bit of research, make sure you know what product you're putting on trees. It drives my husband crazy, but I have a very large ash tree in my backyard, and I don't let him do any kind of herbicide or fertilizer underneath that tree. I'm like, okay, you see this line? I was like, you just don't even go in there. That's my territory right there. So I just like to leave that tree alone right there. So I mentioned, string trimmers can sometimes nick the bark of the tree and get into that cambium, that live living tissue of the tree. Lawnmowers will do the same exact thing as well. Any kind of mechanical damage on the tree. So this has grass growing right up to the trunk of the tree. If there was mulch around there, you wouldn't need to have a lawnmower to get rid of that grass right there. So this kind of damage right here, this is right at the base of the tree. You can see this little roll of wood. So that's the wood that the tree is trying to close off that area. But this is always going to be a weak spot. This is where the tree would be prone to breakage if it gets too top heavy. So be really careful using machinery around that. But other kind of damage that humans sometimes inflict on trees. This is a tree that had the straps when the trees were staked to keep it up when it was first planted. And those straps don't break down. They're synthetic, so they're not going to break down on the tree. And no one removed it. So as that tree is growing in diameter, it grew around these straps, which is girdling the tree and causing it to not be able to move water and nutrients as efficiently. So even if you were to cut the straps off, you can see right here where it's grown all the way through that tree right there.
I noticed the other day that all our trees out here still have them attached.
Yeah.
When, is a year enough time?
A year is perfect. Yeah. So if you planted a tree and it had straps on it, we generally say, after that year, because those roots have started to get out into that native soil and should make it sturdy. Now, if the stakes have wooden stakes in the ground to attach the straps, if you pull up the stakes, you can kind of just do this on the tree and just see if it wiggles a lot. If it still wiggles, I'd go ahead and put that back in for a little bit. A lot of times we don't stake trees. We plant trees in the right of way, and unless it's a really busy road that has a lot of wind, we generally don't stake our trees. So unless they're kind of loose when they went in, or the soil might be holding water and is a little bit soft, that would be a good time to stake, but we generally don't stake our trees. But 1 year, and then you can take the materials off. After Christmas, please take your lights off your trees. This was at a shopping center in Charlotte, and lights look lovely in trees. I love lights in trees. It looks so magical. Take them down every year, please. Don't leave them on your tree. This tree is completely grown around these Christmas lights, and the lights don't work anymore. So definitely causing a problem for that tree. One of our coworkers, Frank, took this picture. It's a bike lock that the tree is completely grown around as well. So we don't want to attach things around the base of the tree. Remember, our trees are growing in diameter. So we definitely don't want to attach things to it. Another issue with something like this with this chain, if that tree can completely enclose that, if someone needs to cut down this tree, that's a really dangerous situation for someone using a saw as well. So, kind of because we do maintenance work as well, we try to think about that. If you have trees near your house and you need to do any work, it's really important to try to protect these trees. What we generally recommend For every inch that the tree is in diameter, so that's right about 4.5 feet, for every single inch, you should stay 1 foot away from every single side of the tree. So a tree that's 8 inches, stay 8 feet north, south, east, and west. So basically you have a big circle around that area. And what we're trying to do with that protection is it's not just to protect the trunk of the tree, it's to protect that root zone of that tree right there. Roots on trees can go super duper far, sometimes even 2.5 times the height of the tree. If it has the space, if it's got the oxygen, the water, the nutrients, it'll grow, it'll go there. So we really want to protect that root area of the tree more so than just the trunk. So just some bad examples that I see around town, piling dirt near trees. Just like your mulch, you don't want to put anything more than 4 inches around the base of the tree. Dirt, stone, whatever. Too much, it'll restrict the amount of oxygen that gets to the tree roots and will stress out the tree.
Another question about wounds on
Yes.
the tree, so for machinery or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we can do to help it heal, to like cover it up?
That's a great question. So a lot of research has shown that if a tree gets nicked up, the best thing to do is just let the tree do its natural processes. So it's just to allow it to do that. We don't want to paint it. I used to work in South Carolina, and down in the low country, people would, if there was a hole in the tree, they put bricks in it, they put concrete inside of it, they just fill it up with stuff. They thought it was better to fill up that hole. We don't want to do that. If you have a hole in your tree, you don't want to put concrete, because concrete is really firm and stable, which is great. But when a tree needs to be able to flex and turn when it gets into windy situations, you're adding something really stiff, that's actually worse for the tree. You don't want to paint. Sometimes you can find, people call it tree paint, or it looks black. You want to let that tree just close that wound over. If you paint over it, sometimes that'll trap moisture inside, which can lead to decay inside the tree. So it's really best to just kind of leave it alone. Now, if it's a really big wound, or if it's about half of the tree is completely wounded, I would call an arborist to come out and evaluate that, just to make sure how deep it is, and if it's really, the tree is going to actually be able to close that over. Sometimes, we'll see cars by the side of the road that get hit and they'll have a very large wound in them. It's just too much that the tree can't close over. So if you're worried that it's too much, go ahead and have someone come out to look at that. So this is another example where they kind of sort of tried to protect these trees. But again, remember, for every inch in diameter, you want to go 1 foot. They didn't quite get that far on these trees. We want to make sure we're protecting all this root zone right there. So if you have to have any work on your tree, near your tree, like your sewer line gets clogged up and you have to replace it, or your water line to your house, just be really careful. Try to stay as far away from that tree as possible. Cutting the roots can make it structurally unstable. And then of course that stresses the tree as well. A couple things I wanted to talk about is we call them red flags. What should you look for in your tree to know you might need to call a professional to come look at this? Anytime you have a cavity or an opening inside your tree, sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes you can look inside and see really how high up that goes and how deep it goes. On this particular tree, it has a seam right there. So this, when I went out to look at the tree, I was using some specialized tools to sound it, and up to here, it sounded like it was hollow up that high. So that's a tree. This is a spot that is definitely a defect. This is an area that the tree could break. So look for openings, look for cracks, look for any areas of decay. So I'm just going to show a couple pictures of some of these examples. This is a group of ash trees up in the university area, and you can see right here, I could see all the way through that tree. It was open on both sides of the tree. So when you have a tree, a lot of trees will be hollow. So if you think about like a pipe, sometimes pipes are solid, sometimes pipes are hollow. And a hollow pipe, as long as the outer rim is thick enough, it's really strong. It's kind of the same thing with trees too. A tree with a hollow in the center, as long as the wood on the outside, the living tissue is thick enough to support the tree, then it's okay. But where we start getting worried is where we have openings in the bark, where we have these big open cavities. Definitely something to look for in this little tree right here in the back as well. I could have probably crawled into that cavity right there. It was pretty big. This is another one where you have an opening, and as you look inside of the tree, you can see the wood in there is decaying as well. I always thought this picture is funny, the reflectors, it kind of looked like a little ghost face to me, so I always thought it was a fun picture. So look for these openings. This is a tulip poplar tree, and this is sunlight coming through. This is really, really high up. This is probably like 25 feet off the ground. So definitely look for those. Where we have, in the beginning, I talked a little bit about the codominant branching. So this is what can happen. Because remember, the bark between those two branches aren't fused together. And so during this windstorm, these two branches were pulling apart and opening. So the crack you can see goes all the way down. So that whole area was prone to failure. This actually happened the day before we were supposed to get a really big wind event about 3 years ago. And we had a contractor come out that day, and we saw it, and they removed this tree completely. That way, we didn't get large branches that were failing into the road or close to houses. I mentioned earlier, in Charlotte, we have water, we have sewer lines that come from the street to the house. Sometimes those break, and so sometimes they need to get repaired. Any work that is really close to the trunk of the tree, that's where your really large roots that are helping to hold that tree into the ground are located. The closer you get to the trunk, that's your structural roots. The further you get away, they're smaller, they're more fine, they're taking up water and nutrients. So anytime you're getting close within the drip line of that tree, you definitely want to be careful if you do need to do any kind of work that might sever tree roots. So this is just a picture of this area. This particular tree, it had a break in the water line and it had to be repaired. And to do the work, they had to excavate out this area. You can see the drip line of the tree is way over here. This tree eventually had to be removed, helped Charlotte Water to make that repair. So it was hard, it really was, but we knew the work they had to do would make this tree unhealthy. So we did get that tree out. You don't want to pave up next to the trunk. Remember, your roots need oxygen, water, and nutrients. You put pavement on top of it. It's really hard for the tree to get the things that it needs. Same thing if you're putting in a driveway. Try to keep as far away from that tree as you possibly can. If you're putting irrigation in near your tree, this is obviously really stressful. So this company dug a trench, and all these are roots of these trees that are completely being severed. So you can ask if you need to put irrigation in, try to get it away from the tree as much as possible, or see if they can bore 2 to 3 feet deep underneath those roots to put that material in as well.
Are the bulk of the roots like within a certain depth?
Yes, great question, thank you. So here in Mecklenburg County, everyone knows our soil is super heavy in clay, right? And so clay soils are a lot more dense than a sandy soil. And so oxygen doesn't get super duper deep through these clay soils. So most of the tree roots around Charlotte and Mecklenburg County are going to be in the upper 3 feet of soil, right? So, it's sometimes I get people that are like, well, I just cut through the first 6 inches. I was like, that's where a lot of the roots are, You don't want to cut through that area. You want to try to go under if you can. It's not always possible to bore under tree roots, but there are different techniques that arborists can assist with. There's a really interesting tool called an air spade, and you can actually, it just is compressed air. It'll blow all the dirt off from the roots, and then you can kind of see your way under the roots, so you can like feed pipes and stuff underneath of it. So there's some pretty interesting techniques, but most of our tree roots are going to be in that upper 3 feet of the soil. So they're there. Right here, this is the bald cypress that dug straight up against the trunk of the tree. You can see all the roots that are tearing, and so this tree was not long for this life, unfortunately. I'm going to move. Other things to look for. We have lots of mushrooms. I mentioned in the beginning, some mushrooms are bad, some fungus is bad. It can affect trees. Some fungus can actually be beneficial to trees as well. A couple things to look for on your trees. One of the ones is called Hypoxalon Canker. And so what that looks like, sometimes during the year, it'll look sort of silvery. Sometimes it'll be kind of black in color. So up the side of this tree is all that Hypoxalon Canker. And so this particular fungus is sometimes just living underneath the bark of the tree. And when the tree is healthy, it's moving water, it's getting everything it needs, that fungus is just kind of hanging out. But when the tree gets under stress, especially for water stress, that fungus will start growing. And because it's underneath the bark of the tree, it'll actually pop the bark off. And so you might have all this bark littered around your tree, and you'll be able to see the fungus growing there. Just a couple more pictures. So sometimes it'll be kind of like a fawn tan brown in color as well. That's when it's making spores, which is the reproductive structure of this particular fungus. Sometimes it's silver, like the sample I have in my hand. Sometimes it's black. But once we start seeing Hypoxalon Canker on a branch, that branch is going to die. Okay, because that fungus is going to grow super duper fast. It's going to block that water from moving around in the tree. If it gets on the main stem of the tree, that whole chunk is going to die as well. So it's not something that can be treated. Once that tree is under stress, we call it a decline spiral. It can't get out. You can't use a fungicide to do anything to treat it. Just know that tree is going to have to be removed. If you walk through the woods, you'll find Hypoxalon on trees on the ground all the time. So that's how I got this. This was just laying on the side of the ground when I was walking through the woods. So you can find it. Another really common one that we see in Charlotte is called Inonotus or weeping conch is a name for it. A conch is just another name for like a big old mushroom. And so we see this a lot of times around our willow oak trees in Charlotte. When it's actively growing, it's usually September, October throughout the winter time. During the hot parts of the summer, you're probably not going to see it growing unless we've had a lot of rain and cool temperatures. It does prefer kind of the cool weather. I think it looks like whole wheat pizza dough. It looks kind of velvety on top. You'll get leaves and sticks that'll be inside of this little thing right there. You can touch it. It smells kind of gross, I'll be honest. It kind of smells like dead fish if you were to like take it. So once we start seeing this mushroom right here, what it is this is just the reproductive structure. So think of like the fruit on an apple. That's your reproductive structure, right? Once we see this mushroom, we know that inside of this root, because it causes a root rot, it stays in the root or the butt, which is the bottom part of the tree. The fungus is actually living underneath the bark. So taking the mushroom off the tree doesn't stop the infection because everything that is decaying the wood on the tree is inside this right here. So once we start seeing this mushroom around the base of the tree, that leads me to believe that those roots are now compromised. That mushroom is in there, the fungus is growing, it's decaying the wood on the inside. And so now this root is not going to be as strong as it should be.
Question is, what is the green growth showing on the bark of the tree in this picture?
Oh yeah, so the green right here is called lichen, which is, it's a symbiotic relationship between one or more algae and fungi. And so the fungus helps to protect the algae. The algae, because it's green, it can capture and make its own food. And so that helps to feed the fungus. The fungus helps to protect that algae right there. So it's a really cool little symbiotic relationship. So lichens do not hurt trees. They just want to hang on somewhere. You can find them on rocks, fence posts, horizontal surfaces. And you're not really getting a whole lot of nutrients, from a rock, right? So they're just having a place to hang on. And so sometimes what lichens indicate is that area is getting more sun, because again, that algae needs the sunlight to make its own food. So sometimes what happens when a tree gets pruned or loses a branch, or the friend tree had to be removed and more sunlight is coming in, you'll tend to see lichens grow on the tree. Sometimes it can indicate that a tree is declining. Now the lichen doesn't hurt the tree. It's not causing the decline of the tree. The tree may have issues. It might have root rot. It just may be at the end of its life. And those lichens are just getting to that sunlight. So sometimes they can be a good indicator. They're a really good indicator of pollutants in the air as well. The air is too polluted, the lichens can't grow. So But this root rot fungus is in a notice right here. The fungus is inside the root, underneath the bark. It's decaying the bark or decaying the wood underneath there. And so when it's fresh, it kind of looks fluffy. As it's kind of dying during the summertime, I think it kind of looks like asphalt, like a piece of asphalt next to the tree, just all cracked and black. So just some things to look for around your tree. If you see that mushroom growing near your tree, definitely have an arborist to come out and look at it. They can use specialized tools and determine how many roots might be compromised, might be having issues due to this root rot disease. This is a picture that one of my former coworkers took. So, this tree was hollow on the inside, but it had some pretty thick wood that was keeping it nice and stable. But it's kind of hard to tell, that's why I put the arrow there. But there's an innonotus clump growing. There were other mushrooms that were causing the root rot on that tree. Another really common, oh yeah.
Heidi wants to know if there is a good app to identify tree leaves and acorns.
So let's think. Sometimes I'm naturalist. I don't think that. I think that's an app that you can like look into. Plant Snap is one of them. Erin, can you think of another one? Oh, Seek. Yeah, thank you. That is another good one as well. So sometimes they'll give you, you'll take a picture of a leaf. It'll give you a broad range of trees to kind of look through. It might not just identify it right away, especially if it looks similar to other types of species. So I will say my coworker Erin is here with us tonight, and she worked really hard to create a Trees of Charlotte book that we're getting printed right now, and it'll be something that's free. And it's not all, it's about 30 species of trees, just some common trees that you find around Charlotte. It's got pictures from here, some pictures that she took, and some information about the trees, what kind of sunlight, what to look for, how to identify it. So that's going to be a really good resource of some common trees around the Charlotte area too. Yeah, no, definitely.
I mean, they just,
There you go.
the other question, I think you're going to get to this about the stuff that looks like spider webs up on the tree limbs.
Along the tree limbs?
I think they're talking about the canker worms.
Oh, the cankerworms. Okay, yeah, I can talk about cankerworms. Another mushroom to look for is this mushroom called Ganaderma, which it's kind of an odd looking little mushroom. It is kind of varnished on the underside, kind of like a, oh yeah, sure. So on the underside, it'll have this brownish, shiny, varnish-like color to it, and the top could be creamy and white. Sometimes it'll be brown all the way across the top. I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but this reddish brownish area that looks really shiny, that's a really good way to find it. Both of these root rot mushrooms will cause top dieback. So in this picture, you can see all the tips on this oak tree are dead. It can cause top dieback. Sometimes you'll see no problem. The tree will be perfectly green. So lots of different things. I'm going to move through these kind of quickly, and I'm sorry, Erin, I think she's helping to drive. So we had a tree at our office that had Ganaderma that was growing on it. The last one that kind of had that shiny, varnished look. And we had an air spade, and so we're like, well, this would be cool. Like, let's air spade. Let's see what that root system looks like. And so this is what it looked like inside the tree. So all this is dead material right here. So as the innonotus, the weeping conch, and that Ganaderma grow on the inside of that root tissue, it's just decomposing that root and making it really stringy and not able to move any nutrients or water. And so this is just that dead material that's been affected by that root rot disease. And then where the tissue was still alive on the tree wants to live. It's going to grow new roots. So it put out new roots trying to get enough water, enough nutrients from the ground. But the tree was so infected that we eventually did have to take it out, unfortunately. With these root rot diseases, like I said, once the tree has this, all the business, all the bad stuff is going inside the root that we can't physically see. So you can't use a fungicide, you can't really do anything. The thing to do is try to keep that tree as healthy as possible. So when we have droughts, water your tree, put mulch around your tree. Try not to cut any roots, because when you cut roots, that's going to open for those spores to get in and affect that tree. You might be able to reduce the crown, which means, make proper pruning cuts to make the top a little less dense to reduce some of the weight on the tree. But sometimes you might get that it's just too far gone and the whole tree has to be removed. And if it does need to be removed, replace the tree. You can put a tree back in an area that has had these root rot infections, because those younger trees are healthy and vigorous and they're going to be able to close off any kind of infection. So it's okay to put a tree back into that area as well. So when you're at your house, and we always want to talk about, planting your tree properly, doing mulch properly, watering your tree, try to keep your lawnmower, your string trimmers away from the tree. Try to stay outside of the drip line with any kind of work that you may need to do. If you have branches that are dead, diseased, or damaged, you can go ahead and cut those. And my last one was scout frequently. So look at your trees, walk around at different times during the year, look for dead branches inside the tree, you might see branches that are dead. They might have mushrooms growing on them. So this is the bottom side of the limb of this tree right here. Dead limbs, you might see these mushrooms on the outside that's rotting as well. So look for those different kind of things. If you live in Charlotte, the city of Charlotte, city limits, and you have a tree that's close to the street, that might be a tree that's a right-of-way tree. And those are the trees that we manage in the city of Charlotte. We have a tree ordinance that has language in there that can't prune the trees, remove the trees, fertilize trees, plant trees in the right of way without a permit. So if you think you have a tree in the right of way, so these trees that are colored in white, these trees are considered right of way trees. So if you think you have a tree there, call the landscape management office. I'll put my next slide, we'll have some contact information, and let us know. Just, if you think the tree needs to be pruned or it's got some dead branches inside of it, call us and say, I have this tree, think it's in the right of way, we can look it up and let you know if it's a right of way tree or a tree on private property. So I live on a street without a sidewalk. I still have right of way from the street towards my property line that is reserved. So that's where the water lines and the sewer lines and stuff are. So even if you don't have a sidewalk, that tree might be in the right of way, even though it feels like your yard, your property. If you have a sidewalk, that's a really easy marker to let you know where your property line is and the city maintained property is. Anything on your private property is the private property owner's responsibility to maintain. We're coming up where, we may get a little bit more rain right now, hopefully not ice. I don't love ice, trees don't love ice, but if you do have any kind of damage to trees, if a limb falls out of a tree, even if it's on private property, but it falls into the road, you want to call 911. Let them know that if there's a tree down in the road or a limb blocking the street, and that will get to our work system, and our arborists will be able to look to the area and determine what work needs to be done to clear that road. So part of our charge at landscape management is we have to keep the right of way clear of obstructions. So fire, medic, police can get through the areas where they need to go, and people can get out of their houses as well. So if there is a tree in the road or a limb that's in the road, call 911 to report it. We'll go look at it. We do have a storm map. It's at charlottenc.gov/storms. And this will show you live updates of what calls have been made. So the green, this is from a while ago, but these green are the requests that have come in to let us know that trees are down or there's some tree material on the road. I'm sorry, the green is, I apologize. The red is where we have new calls. The green is where we had a call, but now it's been cleared. The road is wide open. If there's a yellow dot, that means a tree has fallen on a utility line. So federal regulations prohibit the city of Charlotte from working around utility lines. And so if a tree limb is on a utility line, you need to call Duke Energy to have them come take care of that. We just can't remove that from that area. Yes.
It is past 8 o'clock.
Yes.
I have 3 more questions.
Okay, good. So I'm going to leave this up because I think Yep, that's my last slide. So this is how you contact landscape management. You can visit our website. You can use the CLT Plus mobile app to put in if you have a request about a tree. You can call 311 if it's not an emergency. Again, if it's an emergency and a tree's in the road, call 911. But for non-emergency, you can call 311, or you can call our office directly as well. So yes, I will take questions.
All right, so Jesus wants to know how much damage building a tree house can do to you.
Okay, so it kind of depends on if you're drilling into the tree to attach the joists and stuff underneath the tree. Anytime that you go through the bark and through that living tissue, you're causing a wound inside that tree. And so that tree is going to make those defenses to try to close off that invader, for lack of a better word. And sometimes around that area, you can get decay set in, kind of like on here. You can see the decay wood right there. If you can build it, on posts instead of physically attaching the tree. Now, to put a post in the ground, you got to dig a hole, you got to dig a footing to put it in there. So, definitely consider having an arborist to come out and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What is the safest way for me to do it? And they'll be able to give some good advice for that.
Heidi says a neighbor planted a butterfly tree close to our property. Now hundreds of trees sprout in my yard. Okay. Any advice on how to control that?
So I'm guessing she's thinking Buddleia, maybe a butterfly bush. Yeah, probably. They can get seedy. They can be a little bit invasive, I'll be honest, and they kind of spread everywhere. They're beautiful and butterflies love them, but they're getting, and some of them can get a little bit weedy. So you can pull them up. If it's really hundreds of them, it may need to be like a contact herbicide. But any kind of like a Roundup type material that is just on the leaves to kill it back is also going to kill the grass as well. So you can look for some products that some of them are labeled that'll kill the weeds but not the grass. Look really carefully. Look at those certain types of products. If it's close to an existing tree, I probably wouldn't use a herbicide. If it's outside the drip line of the tree and super far away, then it'd probably be okay to use that.
Oh, yeah. And then our last question, how do you prevent rabbits from nibbling on the young bark of a tree? Is it okay to wrap the bottom with a plastic barrier for the first couple of years? They lost their dogwood.
They would? Oh, the dogwood. I lost the dogwood to deer rubbing on the side. So instead of using like a plastic material, you could always get, that corrugated pipe that you get for like a French tree. You could cut that in half and just wrap it around so it's super loose along the trunk of the tree. So it's not going to restrict the growth of the tree. It's much bigger, than a small dogwood probably. If it's a really big dogwood, you could probably get really fine metal mesh. The rabbits aren't going to want to chew through the metal, and kind of put that around the tree. I know for the deer, and I get deer in my yard, and they've killed 3 trees and they've eaten to the ground my black gum every single year. But I have a cage that's about 6 feet tall that I stake into the ground. That's the only way I can keep the deer off my trees. My yard looks insane because I have all these like little round cages, like little bales around all these different plants. But I wouldn't use plastic. Like I said, that corrugated pipe, you might be able to kind of put around it, just kind of cut it open. Yeah.
Well, if anybody online there has any more questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, or there is.
Yes, feel free. I love getting pictures. I love getting the questions. Trees are fascinating. But thank you all for sticking with me this long. I mentioned before I got started, I'm a talker. You're gonna probably need to stop me. So I feel pretty good. I got through all my slides at this point.
Really fascinating. You're getting tons of thank yous.
Oh, thank you.